Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Disassembly Required. As always, I'm your host, Jolene, and I would like to start off this episode by apologizing for last week. I meant to upload last week, and I had recorded an episode. However, when I transferred it over to my SD card for editing, um, for some reason, something happened where the file got corrupted. So I was not able to upload. I just tried to see if there's anything I could salvage from it. But the complete audio file was just gone. There's nothing I could do. So I'm here today to talk to you guys about horror movies, and more specifically, the art of horror. Now, of course, this is October. Halloween is Saturday, as of the time of me recording this. And of course, it's sort of tradition for most people to watch horror movies during October. Of course, not everybody does so, but many do. And of course, a lot of people do it in sort of a passing thing of just, well, it's the season. And, they have some that they like, but they don't really think too much about most horror movies. Most people don't. But horror movies are a interesting genre because horror movies have this sort of strange little, maybe niche isn't the right word, but they have this strange little feature about them where you can make a bad action movie and it can still be an action movie. It might be funny to watch because it's bad, but you can still make it. Or a rom-com or a sci-fi movie, whatever. But the thing about horror movies is they're sort of similar to comedy movies in that you can make a bad comedy movie and it can still be funny, but not because the jokes are funny. But horror movies sort of fit into that sort of strange niche because horror movies, you can make a bad horror movie and it won't be scary, but people will still love it. I mean, it's a sort of artistry thing. People enjoy, the interesting kills, the interesting designs, or just the weird stories. There's a cult classic film that I got the opportunity to watch called Hack-O-Lantern, which is by far one of the strangest films, one of the strangest horror movies at least, I've ever seen. But the plot of it essentially is that this kid is he has a very good relationship with his grandfather, and his grandfather is part of a cult who worships Satan, and the cult killed the kid's dad, and then he grows up and is just a dick. And then the cult starts killing more people for really no reason. It's a very strange movie. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but it's really funny to watch because of how ridiculous it is. Like, there's a scene where there's some of the things about horror movies that are often cult classics or often loved because they're bad is that they have a lot of scenes that would work in comedy movies, ironically, and that's part of why people like them, is because the juxtaposition of the theme and what's going on. So, for instance, in Hack-O-Lantern, there's a scene where this couple is making out on top of a grave, and like a freshly dug grave, and the girl goes to grab the guy's hand because she's on top of him, and she reaches and grabs the hand of a dead guy, and we know it's a dead guy because we saw him die in an earlier scene and get thrown into that grave. But we see her grab this dead guy's hand and just be like, "Oh, your hand's so cold," and then he says the cheesy line of, "Oh, I know a way to get it warmed up real quick." And you're just watching this like, how did this happen? What is this? What am I watching? It gets even worse because then in a later scene, the guy's sister asks the girl to show them where they made out, which is when they find that there was a freshly dug body on the grave, or in the grave that they were making out on, and that body was actually the boyfriend of the sister. So it's just it's really weird and wacky. And horror movies are one of those things that a lot of people seem to want to take seriously, but you don't need to take a horror movie seriously for it to be a horror movie. It just needs to have sort of a checklist. There just needs to be certain themes, certain a horror movie needs to be made and with essentially a respect to the art. I know that sounds snooty, but I believe you can't really make a horror movie unless you actually understand horror movies. Because you can make an action movie, and it can be, you can have no idea what an action movie is, really. If you just have a vague idea of, like, something that most people would be like, "Oh yeah, that's cool," then it'd probably be at least a decent movie, or at least it'd be funny to watch. Like, but it's different with a horror movie, because you can't just make a horror movie, and that's a misconception that a lot of people have, is that you can just make a horror movie. That misconception actually got really popular after the Blair Witch Project became popular and rose to mainstream success in the early 90s. I believe it was the early 90s. I could be wrong. It might have been the mid-90s. But essentially, for those who don't know, because I know, not everybody has seen every movie or whatever, the Blair Witch Project is this really famous found footage movie. Essentially what happens is these three people, they go out into the woods to try to film a documentary about a witch who supposedly lived in these woods. And what happens is they end up getting lost, and eventually they find the witch, they all die. It's one of those sort of movies. But it's all shot on like a sort of home video camera. So it has that quality of, anybody could have done this. Which gave a lot of people the idea of, oh, I can do that. Especially now that most people have video cameras, and many video cameras, at least, as far as phones go, are some pretty decent quality. If you have like a better phone, say like a Galaxy, one of the new Galaxy models, or I don't know what iPhone is it now, the 12, the 12. I could say fuck because we're at minute 9, and after minute 1, YouTube stops screening for curse words. For those, a slight aside, for those who don't know, the more you curse in your videos, YouTube is less likely to recommend them to people, but usually they only screen for roughly about the first minute. So that's always good. Plus it helps, the more I curse, the more it helps YouTube to know, oh hey, this person doesn't make content for children. Which, is definitely something that I want YouTube to know, because I do not make content for children. I make content for at least teens. And children, as defined by COPPA, I believe, are individuals of ages, 13 and younger, or something like that? No, 12 and younger, because you have to be 13 in order to make a YouTube account. Anywho, Sorry about that aside. But when you make a horror movie, you have to really understand the art, of course. And in understanding that art, you're able to fully make a good horror movie, or at least make a decent one. And with the rise of the found footage genre, that sort of respect kind of weaned a bit. Not to say that, of course, you have to have a reverence for horror movies or anything in order to make one, not at all. But what I am saying is that when you have the opportunity to make something like a found footage film, it can really just be as simple as, you know, you and your friends take like an hour out of your day, maybe not even an hour. You and your friends take, say like maybe 4 hours out of a day. You run around the woods. Someone is a monster or something, and people die with cheap effects that are cut away or forgiven because of, you know, you're using a handheld camera, so you're moving it around with your head, in a sense. You're moving it around the same way you would when you're looking around. Especially for a lot of these movies use night vision as a sort of excuse of having a camera. And in doing so, a lot of those effects, like I said, are forgiven. Now, does that mean that a found footage movie can't be good? Of course not. There's a lot of, at least very interesting to watch found footage movies. Are they all good? No, but they're definitely ones that you can watch and be like, oh, that was interesting. I like the way they did this. They're good films, but they're not good horror movies necessarily. And for instance, I love the 2 movies called Grave Encounters. The effects are a bit cheesy, but the way it's framed doesn't really make you think that it's like super cheesy. And that's a big part of it is, of course, perception. You have to sort of, whenever you make a horror movie, you have to have like that suspension of disbelief. Like, you know, whenever Jason Voorhees does something crazy in the movie, like randomly seem to appear out of nowhere, or, you know, perform some crazy kill, you know, there's that suspension of disbelief of like, oh, well, I guess he probably could have done that somehow. There's actually a video made by Film Theory, for those of you who watch it. There's a video made by Film Theory that was put out, I think, 2 weeks ago, where they went over how Jason Voorhees doesn't actually teleport. Many people theorize that because Jason is essentially a revenant, sort of like a mystical-esque being. A revenant, for those who don't know, is like a being who was brought back to life to get vengeance on the person who killed them because of like their intense anger and rage, essentially. But part of the caveat of that is they can only die once they've killed the person who killed them, or who was responsible for their death. But if that person is already dead, like in Jason's case, he just can't die, which is why Jason's immortal. And that also explains why Jason Voorhees has super strength, seems to be like very intelligent with the uses of like different things like weapons and shit. But anywho, oh god, I lost track of what I was saying. I knew this was gonna happen. But yeah, you have to have a suspension of disbelief, which works kind of better in found footage movies than it does in standard horror movies. Because with found footage movies, there's like that air of realism provided by using, you know, just a handheld camera or a phone camera. And that realism is sort of what makes the genre itself so popular. Because without it, then, you just have a bunch of, films with college kids running around the woods screaming about a monster or a ghost or something. Which, I don't know about you, but I suppose most people probably aren't into that. And it's very... In going into suspension of disbelief, that also leans into... You have to go that much harder when you do a regular movie for suspension of disbelief. Because with a regular horror movie, the suspension of disbelief has to be at a certain point where it's sort of like the uncanny valley. For those who don't know, it's a synthetic humanoid test where essentially there's the valley where on one side it's like a robot that's very obviously a robot, like a Wall-E. And then on the other side there's an android that is indistinguishable from humans. But in the middle, in the deep valley, there is the humanoids that are still recognized as robotic and have a sort of creepy quality about them. But that, of course, isn't necessarily strictly limited to humanoids, or rather to androids, the robots, because that scale is used for different things. Of course, clowns fit on that scale, technically speaking, because clowns resemble the human form, but are very creepy because of, the different coloring, face paint, and that's why most people, that's essentially the scientific reason that people are afraid of clowns, is because they fit into that uncanny valley where part of our, ancient ancestral brains sees that and registers it as a predator, in a sense, because predators, or certain predators rather, will mask themselves by looking like their prey, essentially. Now, I guess that could be a good segue into movie monsters. Now, of course, suspension of belief comes with movie monsters, because in order to have a good movie monster, you have to have a world in which that movie monster seems believable. I mean, Pennywise works because he exists in a world where something that strange seems believable. In the small town of Derry, what is it, Maine? It's probably Maine. If I remember correctly, like most of Stephen King's stories are written in Maine or about Maine, because he's from Maine. It's one of those northeastern states. And similarly, Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees work because they have a world in which they seem real. I mean, even just going off of the simple first story or the first movie of Friday the 13th series, which just has Jason's mom as the killer, that is something more realistic and more interesting because of it's believable, that in her grief, a mother who had lost her son would, take her vengeance out on the people that she saw as responsible for her son's death, which were the camp counselors. For those who haven't seen Friday the 13th, I believe, I could be wrong, but last time I checked, they should still be all on Amazon Prime if you have them. They have weird covers, though. They have weird copyright neutral covers. I think probably because Amazon couldn't get the rights to the original covers or something. But I digress. Having that believability made Friday the 13th an incredibly popular film, which of course is why it even got a sequel. And it was in the sequel, of course, that Jason became, the killer. He became well, not necessarily the killer we all know today, but because in the first movie he actually wore a sack over his head. If you've ever seen the film, I believe it was a film in the 70s, I think it was called The Town That Dreaded Sundown. He wore a very similar outfit to that of the killer in that movie, which was a potato sack over his head and what was it? It was a potato sack and like denim overalls. And that's what Jason wore in his first appearance as the killer. And it was only until, I believe it was the third movie, where he finally donned that hockey mask that people now recognize as Jason's. So it's really interesting to see like that sort of evolution. And at that point, I mean, in the movie at least, there was that weird bit of suspension of like, oh well, somehow maybe he survived or something. But then as it keeps going on, of course, it becomes more obvious that Jason is just straight up immortal. Which, is something that people would assume with a lot of different slasher movie villains. Is that, oh, well, they have to be immortal, like, because they're just so absolutely crazy to see that, I mean, that's the only logical conclusion, is that character must be immortal, because they're so, I mean, they take so many hits, they get stabbed, that kind of stuff. And Scream is a really good movie that, if you want to know a lot about the slasher genre without having to watch a lot of movies, watch Scream. Because Scream is a movie, it's made by, if I remember correctly, it was made by Wes Craven. And it is a sort of satire of slasher movies. But the interesting thing about the fact that it's a satire is that it's such a good satire of slasher movies that it's also just an incredibly well done slasher movie. Because the director, if I remember correctly, the director is Wes Craven, but if I am wrong, please do correct me in the comments. Do a actually or whatever, you'll get some points. I don't know. But because the director, Wes Craven, understood horror movies as a director himself, Wes Craven, if I remember correctly, was also the one who directed Nightmare on Elm Street. I mean, that movie is famous as a horror movie. I mean, it even got a... it's so famous, it even has a... God, it makes me laugh thinking about it, I'm sorry. It has a song that was sung by the Fresh Prince himself. If you ever want to watch a movie and just kind of giggle, or listen to something, a song, and that'll maybe put you in a bit of a Halloween mood, but also make you kind of laugh, just listen to the song "Nightmare on My Street" by the Fresh Prince and Jazzy J, I think it was. It's, oh my god, it's a riot. It's the song. I would even more so recommend watching the music video, because the music video is amazing. It's hilarious. But as like I was saying, as the director of horror movies, so famous as the Friday the 13th. No, sorry, so famous as Nightmare on Elm Street. Wes Craven really understood the art of horror, and that art, of course, is a difficult art to master, no matter who you are, because it requires such an in-depth knowledge and understanding of what it means to have a horror movie. Because, I mean, like I said earlier, a horror movie can be made by just anyone. But a good horror movie has to be made by somebody who understands what a horror movie is. And it's great to be able to watch a good horror movie when the person who watches it, or the person who makes it knows what they're making, knows who they're making it for, because of course a horror movie has to have an audience just like any movie. And it's really just amazing to be able to watch that kind of movie. And a good example of that would be, I suppose Alien would be a really great example of that. If any of you have seen Alien, God, I don't know where to watch it these days. I believe it was on Netflix for a really short period of time, but that was before I got into horror movies. And then I believe it was on Amazon Prime for a brief period. And I think it's probably still on Amazon, but I don't know if it's on Amazon Prime. But I know it's definitely, you can find it somewhere at the very least. But it's a great movie. It's a sort of a, what's the term? Closed circuit film. So essentially the premise is that there are, if I remember correctly, 9 people on a, there are 9 people on this space station. This is like hundreds of years in the future. And it was made in the 70s, so the space station has that retro-futurist sort of style, where everything looks like a space station from the 70s, because it was made in the 70s. And H.R. Giger, who did the main design, and I think he might have had a hand in the directing of the film, but he did the main design of everything, and he very much understood the way to get this creature and the whole air of the film, as far as designing a good monster, designing a good setup for the monster, all that kind of stuff. He knew a really great way to be able to get into the minds of people in a way that unnerves them. The alien, the egg, the face hugger, all of it was very specifically designed to play on the subconscious in a way that makes you uncomfortable. For instance, the alien, for any of you who have seen the movie Alien, the alien in Aliens is called a xenomorph. The xenomorph's head, I just motioned to my own head, forgetting I'm not recording audio. The head of the xenomorph is very phallic, you could say. And it was intentionally made that way because of the themes that Giger wanted to incorporate into the movie via his designs. There was that. There was also originally the alien design for the eggs. So essentially, the way xenomorphs reproduce is, well, I think as far as the first movie is considered, xenomorphs reproduce by laying an egg that had another species in it called a face hugger. It's colloquial, colloquially known as a face hugger. I don't know if it has a more scientific name as far as the movie's concerned. But the face hugger is then attached to another species' face, per the name, and will lay eggs in that person's or species or whatever's throat. And then, of course, these xenomorph will pop out of the chest and occasionally eat said corpse, which is sort of similar to the way that certain species of wasps breed, if I remember correctly. And all of the designs, like for instance the original design of the egg was meant to be similar to, there's a word for it that I heard a while ago, like a very specific word. It's the opposite of phallic, but my brain can't think of it right now. I had it written down somewhere. But essentially it was made to resemble a vagina, because the whole, if you haven't gotten it by now, H.R. Giger designed the movie to have a sort of sexual undertone to it, and that was done by incorporating these different aspects of the monster that played on the subconscious. Like, so you might see the xenomorph, but there's a part of your brain, and even if you don't actively recognize it, there's a part of your brain that sees a xenomorph and is like, oh hey, that thing's head looks like a dick. But your brain doesn't automatically, that might not, for everybody at least, be the first thing that comes into mind. That first thing that comes to mind might just be, that thing's scary as hell. I mean, the xenomorph is also just in general a great movie monster design, because it works from multiple perspectives. It works because it's an alien in a futuristic setting, but the setting in the future is just creepy enough because of the modernistic design and the use of like more modern technology for the 70s, which is by now horrifically outdated. But by then people probably would have seen Alien and been like, oh yeah, that's probably what a spaceship will be like, hundreds of years in the future. It works because of the very dimly lit scene of the space station, and the alien, of course, is all black. It's completely pitch black, so it has that aspect of, it can be hiding in the shadows like anywhere. Like, for instance, there's this really interesting scene where this woman is they're all searching essentially for the alien. They're trying to find out where it is, and one of the crew members of the ship, she hears this like knocking sound coming from this closet, and she's like slowly walking towards it, and it cuts between her and this other guy, and the other guy, if I remember correctly, he's working on like a generator or something, and it cuts between her and him, and she is just slowly walking towards this closet, and then she opens it up, and jump scare, out comes the cat, because there's a cat on the space station. And then it switches back to the guy who was working on the generator, and you see the alien sort of come down from the ceiling using its tail to keep itself from just straight up dropping to the ceiling. And then, of course, that guy dies instead. But that's like a really amazing scene just because it works up the tension so well. And you still get the jump scare, but you also get the kill because while the jump scare, of course, is like the classic jump scare of like, oh, they thought it was going to be the monster, but it's just an animal. But then you also get, that tension still resolved because instead of getting the tension resolved by a jump scare, which is more fleeting, you get the tension resolved by an actual kill. You get to see the xenomorph take this dude out, and it's great. It's an amazing scene, and having monsters like that is what makes movies like that so famous. It also can be their downfall, however, because, of course, as we all know, Alien was then followed up by Aliens, and then Alien 3, and then Alien Resurrection, and then all of the recent Alien movies, and Prometheus, which is an Alien movie for those who don't know. And it's all just, no. It's like Aliens is it's not as good as the first one, but it's definitely still a good movie. But the more you go on into watching these movies, the worse it gets, and it does not get better. Which is kind of sad because the xenomorph is a really great design for a creature. I mean, it's horrifying because they're very difficult to kill in the first movie, especially because of the acid blood that they have. If I didn't mention it earlier, xenomorphs have acid blood. As in, if they bleed, it will straight up melt through the decks of the space station, which is what happened. It melted through the decks until there wasn't enough to melt through anymore. And that's how they would track the alien in certain scenes in certain movies. And good creature design is paramount. I mean, it's easier to do serial killer design for horror movies because really it can be anything. It could be, Patrick Bateman just wearing a suit and he's got a knife in his briefcase. That's it. Or it could be Leatherface with the chainsaw, which looks really dumb, but the movie is famous. People, if you say the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I mean, most people will have at least heard of it. I mean, people more often won't know the theme of the movie, which is interesting. The theme of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, for those who don't know, is the meat industry, which I know sounds like vague, and you might be inclined to be like, oh, but that doesn't really sound like it makes sense. But the director intended for the movie to essentially be a what's the word? Analogy for how we treat animals in the meat industry. And I can imagine there's probably many vegans who are very happy to hear that. Because, yes, the message is getting out there, finally. And that might sound like I'm being critical. I'm not trying to be critical of anybody. I'm just saying some things I noticed. But it's definitely just an interesting thing. And of course, a lot of movies have subtext and all that kind of fun stuff. And it's great to be able to see a film like that has such really interesting subtext be so famous. However, it's more difficult to have that kind of stuff with paranormal movies or movies that are more mystical in nature, because usually it's more difficult to have a ghost than to have a serial killer or a monster, because with a monster or a serial killer, you can arrest or kill a serial killer, but with a ghost, you can't really kill a ghost. You can banish it, as so many movies love to show you. You can banish a ghost or a demon or whatever, as long as you believe enough in the power of God. Which is another really fucking annoying thing. If there's one thing I brutally hate, and I really want to say I do brutally hate it, it's the amount of movies that use, because I watch a lot more of like ghost movies, because they often are the ones that fall the flattest. So it's more interesting to me to watch those and see how people try to make them. But so many of those movies use themes of, God being this all-powerful being who somehow magically can't stop demons from getting out of hell, but, it's fine. I watched this film, it was on Shudder, because I recently got Shudder. For those of you who don't know, Shudder is a curated film selection of different horror movies. Essentially, they have, I think it's either one person or like a couple people go out and they search for movies. They search for horror movies. They also make original content as well. But they search for horror movies, and they will put them up on the website. They put them through, process. They want to make sure that they're putting good stuff on the website, not just anything. Which led to me being able to watch The Color Out of Space, which is a really interesting movie. That's that horror movie that stars Nick Cage that just came out. I also got to watch the first two Maniac cop movies, which are old slasher movies about this cop who he's like Jason. He's a revenant. He was brought back from his pure rage of dying, and he goes on a killing spree, and that movie was interesting to me to watch from multiple perspectives. From one, I just enjoyed it because it was sort of funny to watch. It stars Bruce Campbell as well, which he's known for Evil Dead, which is another great movie. It's a bit older, so it's mostly practical effects. But interesting fact about Evil Dead is that the same guy who directed Evil Dead is the guy who directed the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man trilogy. So there's a fun fact for all you loyal listeners. Back to the matter at hand, though. Those were two interesting movies to watch. And if any of you at this point, have heard some of my spiel about some horror movies and are like, oh, well, now I'm kind of in the mood. I want to watch some horror movies. And this Shudder sounds kind of interesting. Well, do I have news for you? I'm not sponsored by Shudder. But you know who did get a sponsorship from Shudder? Film Theory. I watched Film Theory, and this is how I got to use Shudder, which is currently, if you use a certain code at checkout, I believe there's probably other channels that got a Shudder sponsorship, but this is the only one that I follow that did. If you use the code Film Theory at checkout, instead of a 7-day free trial, you get a 30-day free trial, which is it's pretty good. And their annual plan is only, I believe, like $60. So I mean, it's a pretty good deal if you're into horror movies. I definitely would recommend it. I mean, that's $60 for you get TV shows, exclusive movies, and everything like that. It's a great deal, great service. But so I was watching this movie called The Cleansing Hour on there, which was it was just an interesting film to watch. It was a movie about this guy and his friend who run a web series. They have like a little studio, and they run this web series where they perform fake exorcisms. Or rather, where The one friend performs fake exorcisms because he's a fake priest. And the whole movie is really interesting. Essentially, the other friend, the one who runs the show, his girlfriend gets possessed by a demon, and they have to figure it out. They have to figure out who it is in order to banish him. But the part that I hated comes from the end of it, where it's revealed, where you get the big twist of, oh, that wasn't just any demon, it was actually Satan. And then you're just like, what? Like, really? And then the funnier part comes, like, throughout the whole broadcast of him trying to exorcise Satan. It's intercut with people watching the broadcast. And then at the end, Satan looks into the camera and he whispers a spell, and then he bites the power cord and disappears. And oh, he possessed everybody who was watching the show, which is why he wanted millions of people to watch the show. It's really fucking dumb. But it's even worse because it's a cop-out of... It's Christianity, Catholicism, if you really just want to... straight up just Christianity and Catholicism are essentially just cop-outs when it comes to horror movies involving anything paranormal. I mean, hell, it was even used as a cop-out in one of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. They were like, oh, well, Freddy Krueger wasn't just an evil pedophile serial killer. He was also the what am I talking about? He was also the son of a nun who was assaulted and is the product of said event. And you're just sitting there like, what is this? Why? Nobody cared. Because this is revealed, if I remember correctly, in the third movie, Dream Warriors, which has a killer theme song. It's made by Dokken, which is like a power metal band. But it's just a cop-out for evil, essentially. It's like, oh, well, actually, it was the devil. You know, something can't just exist and be evil. It has to be... it has to have something to do with religion. Which, I get it, a lot of people use religion as a sort of moral compass, but it doesn't mean that it's the moral compass. I mean, for any of you who are really interested in, like, the subversion of European morality, I say European because Christianity and all that. If you're looking for a subversion in mainstream, like, European morality, I'd recommend Berserk. It's really interesting manga. It's essentially about this guy who, God, it's been a while since I've watched it. But essentially the whole theme is subverting the whole, oh, God is good, and, you know, angels are doing the Lord's work, as long as you know, pray to God, and as long as you're religious, you're a good person. And it subverts all that while keeping, like, the main, more modern themes of it. But also using that medieval setting as a groundwork for it. The paranormal movies, of course, there are some of them that don't relate to God at all, which, in my opinion, those are the better ones. For instance, Evil Dead does not use anything related to the Bible or God or Satan or anything like that. There are, of course, mentions of like demons and stuff, but that's like more classical. Demons are more universal to different religions, of course, and of course they have different names and all that, in different religions depending on which ones you're looking at. But like I said, they're more universal than straight up. This is the Christian God, and this is Jesus. You know, that kind of stuff. And it does make me sad as somebody who loves horror movies to see so many people who make horror movies just give up when it comes to how to defeat different monsters or demons or whatever, and they're just like, oh no, it's God. Like even in what was that really shitty movie that came out last year? I think La Llorona. It was a movie based off of I believe it's a Mexican folktale. I could be wrong. Like I said, if I'm wrong, correct me in the comments. But essentially, it's this big movie based off of this very famous folktale. But the problem comes with when they try to get rid of the spirit, La Llorona. They're like, oh, we can't do it. How are we gonna do it? And then they're just like, oh, I know. The main woman is just like, oh, I know how I'll do it. I'll just stab the ghost in the chest with a cross. And that'll work. And guess what? It does! They get rid of the demon by stabbing it in the chest with a cross. They get rid of the fucking ghost of the non-corporeal being by stabbing it in the chest with a cross. It's not a big one either. It's like a standard size, like probably like 6-7 inch like standard cross you might see in like anyone's home, hanging up over a doorway or something. And oh my god, just thinking about it, like I can't stop laughing because like I know my description might sound ridiculous, like it might be a lot more interesting or epic in the film. It definitely isn't. If anything, it's worse. But I would definitely recommend watching that for anyone who's interested. In closing, I think my list might be a bit too long for me to record right now because I have to go do something after this. So when I post this video, I will have a list of recommendations in the description of the video for anybody who might be interested in some nice Halloween frights. I mean, I don't know about anyone else, but I know I'm going to be marathoning some horror movies on Saturday. And, yeah, so I would like to thank all of you for listening. Sorry, I tripped over my words a bit there. I'd like to thank all of you for listening. I'd like to thank you for your patience with my upload schedule. I've mentioned this before, but I'm a college student, so I have a lot of meetings, a lot of homework. Doesn't always, I don't always have the time to be able to upload and everything, and I try to keep people updated on my Twitter. If any of you are interested in following my Twitter, it's at the Crimson Fucker. It's also linked on my About page, or the About section of my YouTube channel. So yeah, go feel free to follow me on there. I'll also have a link to it in the description, as I do with every video. And yeah, I hope you guys have a spooky Halloween, and maybe, this is not a promise, but maybe if we're all lucky, I might post an extra video on Friday of me reading some spooky stories. I'm trying to collect some good ones, but of course it's always difficult getting good horror stories that haven't been read a billion times. So yeah, hopefully I'll see you guys soon.